Hello and welcome to another instalment of Start, Grow, Monetize, your podcast with me, James Burtt, and him over there, Alex Chisnall. Today on the pod, we're talking all about how to grow your podcast audience, because we know we could talk about RSS feeds, we could talk about the tactics, the strategies, and how to link up to clever systems, blah, blah, blah. You don't want to know any of that, do you? You just want to grow your damn podcast. So we're going to help you. Growing a podcast, is it the most common question that you get asked?
No.
How to grow the podcast and how to make some cash out of it. That's the two thing. Okay, fine.
Yeah, but it's that thing, isn't it? Like, what's the hardest thing to do? The hardest thing is to launch a podcast.
Yeah.
Once you've launched it, what's the hardest thing? To grow your podcast.
Yeah.
Then what's the hardest thing? To actually make money from your podcast.
Well, that's a great upsell. For 5 episodes in, we're making it really difficult for people. Thanks very much. So we're going to talk about, today on this pod, we're going to talk about strategies to leveraging social media, how to utilize networking, how to look at guest appearances of your show and other people's shows. We'll talk about that later. Using SEO and keywords to make sure you're discoverable, and also how to engage your audience and making interactive content. So let's talk about this social media bit first.
I was going to say, that is a lot to get through
in
one episode.
In 15 minutes. We've got 5 minutes per bullet point. Go.
All right.
So strategies for leveraging social media. So if someone comes to you and they haven't got social media, they haven't got platforms set up, and they go, I want to grow my audience, what's the first bit of sort of social media based advice that you give people?
I think it's trying to get the handles for what you want, and inevitably, and by I mean what I mean with handles is, if your podcast is the Start, Grow, Monetize Your podcast, then can you get the Instagram? Can you get the TikTok? Quite often, the exact thing that you want might already be gone, because the internet's been going for a little while and social media's been going for a good decade or so.
Yeah.
So it's trying to get the closest version to that, and quite often you might find it's like putting like the .podcast in.
Yeah.
Something as simple
or
as that.
Official at the end of it, or something
like that.
Yeah,
you see that. You do see that. Yeah. So that would literally be my first port of call. What would be the next thing that you would do?
So I think one of the key things to look at is how to leverage your own social media. A lot of time, and I 100%, I think you should get the URL if you can. I think we talked about that in a previous episode. You should definitely get the handles if you can get that. But as you correctly said, there's billions with a B of people using these platforms now. Chances are someone might have nabbed the name that you've already got, and if that is the case, not the end of the world. I also think it's quicker to grow a personal brand than it is a company or a podcast brand. Yeah. If you look at some of the big influencers and some of the big podcasters, you look at Diary CEO's social channels versus Stephen Bartlett. You look at Jamie Lang versus Good Company or Jampot Productions or all that kind of stuff. It's quicker and easier to utilize your own personal brand and to leverage that. So don't be afraid to put podcast content on your personal brand, as long as it aligns with your personal brand message and outcomes and goals and targets that you're chasing. But yeah, don't be afraid to use your own stuff that you've already got, I would say.
No, and also it comes down to that thing that, especially if you are an independent content creator and you're doing this yourself, you're literally doing all of these jobs that morph into one.
Which you probably will be, by the way, to start with. We all were there. We were all there
just
to start with.
Just to lay it out there, you're probably going to be doing this. And then the first thing you should do is get someone to do the things that you don't like to do, but 100% leverage your own social media, because if it means setting up a whole nother bunch of channels, it just becomes another thing that you have to do, that you're probably not going to end up being consistent at. You might smash it out for the first week, first month, but realistically, are you going to be able to keep another ball in the air along with all the other things you're doing, the editing, the production, the creating of the social media assets, the actual scheduling, posting, and all the rest of it that comes with running a podcast? So agreed. First port of call. Yes, if you can get the URLs, get them, but focus on what you've already got and look at, which is, again, if you can only focus on one thing, which is your biggest platform, not necessarily your biggest even, where do you get the most engagement?
Yes.
And where is your ideal client avatar most likely to hang out on those platforms?
That's actually a really good point, because a lot of people will go, I'm going to go for TikTok because it's doing the best job of discoverability right now, or I'm going to use YouTube Shorts because, again, it's actually helping you to organically find that audience. And yes, you should be looking at those platforms, but equally, if you are a B2B SaaS business, then probably making content for social media that works best on LinkedIn is actually going to be your best platform.
Agreed.
Because it's ultimately the thing that's going to drive the outcome of putting leads into your funnel and driving sales to your business. Now, of course, the sales into your business might not be the ultimate goal of your podcast, but at some stage, creating some form of revenue, either directly or indirectly from this podcast, is going to make sense for you to do.
Yeah, desirable.
So don't make... And another challenge that we have, and I have to be careful of how I say this because I love all of our clients dearly, but everyone wants to be bloody Stephen Bartlett. Correct. Everyone wants these punchy trailers. You know, we've spoken to Ant Smith. He's an absolute wizard at creating these trailers. But not every show needs a beautifully woven narrative storytelling with a hero's journey and a story arc and a sound effect and a moment where somebody's going to have one little sad tear rolling down their face.
Always a tear.
So you're talking about B2B SaaS recruitment. We don't need tears. We just need facts and figures.
Yeah.
And one of the a great thing that I heard from somebody the other day is that trailers are really essential if you're looking to entertain. But I don't think you actually need trailers if you're looking to educate. So if you look, actually, I nicked that off Video Joe. So Video Joe, because he'll be editing this, I've given you the credit there. I'm not trying to take it as my own, although I definitely will be posting about it on LinkedIn like it's my own. But in this regard to the podcast that you're listening to right now, this is hopefully you find it entertaining, hopefully you find it engaging, but this is mainly to educate people, not to entertain.
Then. It is to educate, yeah.
It is to educate, is it? I'm here for all of it. But in that regard, then, the clips that we put out in social media just needs to show that you're going to get information rather than just entertainment from this podcast. So again, a further point of not only post on the right platforms, but post the right stuff that actually gives you the right outcome, i.e. you're giving the people the information that they need to make the decision to ultimately come and consume the content. Because that's another thing you've got to be very mindful with podcasting, is that the clips you're making, do they drive somebody to take the further call to action of actually consuming the main long form content?
100%. If we just want, as the example of this show, if we just want somebody to click on that short and then go and consume the 16-minute version of this, then surely in that short we literally want to be telling them what they're going to learn, what the pain point we're going to solve for them. We don't need the Hollywood trailer for the Gladiator 2 movie that I'm going to be watching very soon.
Oh my God, you're so hyped about this movie.
Honestly.
Hopefully Video Joe, who's watching this, is now going to turn this into like some unnecessary trailer. Can you turn him into Rambo?
Rambo's not Gladiator. That's a completely different era, a completely different genre.
He's absolutely geeking out. Right, so that's social media, and I know it's a massive topic, so we'll probably do another deep dive just on maybe on each.
We will.
On each platform specifically. The next thing I want to talk about is the network. So again, another thing that I think people underutilize when they're trying to grow an audience is they're always trying to find new people, these new bunch of people who are floating about in the ether. But again, let's say you're a B2B business, for example, you've got a B2B product offering. You know, what about those people who are on LinkedIn? What about those groups that are on LinkedIn? What about those groups that are on Facebook? What about those newsletters within your sector? I had a sales call yesterday for a very specific form of construction podcast. Now that podcast does not need a massive wide-reaching audience. It does not need for TikTok to pick it up and to make it go semi-viral. No. It needs really good content that's directed at the probably 2,000 companies that it is within its target market. And there's probably a small-scale construction newsletter or group within that guy's network who he can go, hey, I'm doing a podcast. I'd love to give you some clips. I'd love to give you maybe early access to it. There's loads of ways that within your network you can already grow this podcast without you having to go and find a new audience all the time. How do you sort of utilize network?
Yeah, 100%. I think, again, start with what you've already got on that, whatever it is, 6 degrees of separation, etc., and look within your existing network. Who would benefit from you partnering with them and giving them some kind of coverage on your podcast? Is it as simple as interviewing those key decision makers? If there are literally, as you say, 2,000 companies in that space for your sector, who are the big players? We referred to a number of times like Rob Hanna, who's a member of Pod School, and how his sponsor and biggest partner is the biggest player in their space, the legal tech space.
Which is a niche of a niche of a niche, by the way.
Niche of a niche of a niche. But let's start at the top, like he's done. why not? What's the worst that can happen? They say no, you move down to the next one. So, yeah, for me, it's, and we'll cover this again, I know, but, you know, reaching out to people, forming partnerships, making connections for people who can move the needle on your podcast. Because your audience is already out there in significant numbers, okay? You need to access them in significant numbers rather than in individuals. So have a think about where these groups of people are, where they're hanging out. Again, there could be, well, there will be. I've seen it with the airline industry that I used to be in. There are forums where these people hang out. I just did something again the other week in the travel space for a potential consulting client, and again I looked, and there's forums upon forums for business travelers and stuff like that. So if you want to get access to those people,
100%.
that's the kind of stuff you want to get to.
Yeah.
Then they have a newsletter, as you referenced, they have their own social media, etc. So I would start there, and that's from getting people on your show as guests, getting them as partners to be featured on the podcast, and then also to guest on other podcasts that inevitably there's a geeky element to these organizations, but then there's like a customer facing element as well, and you can piggyback off all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just get super strategic, eh?
The guesting part, I think, is really interesting. You touched on a good point there, which I'm glad you finally touched on a good point. I've been waiting for 5-6 episodes, and now he's done it.
I thought I'd drop it in.
But the network, actually be really tactical with who you invite on your show. So, for example, again, I know we're going down the B2B route, and you might be watching this and go, well, I'm not B2B, I'm going to go mass market. Okay, fine. But within the space that you're in, there will be the rock stars of your sector.
Yeah.
Like, you know, B2B, small scale construction of deep piling or whatever it is, like a niche of a niche of a niche. There will be the 10 rock stars in that sector. Now, by proactively going after your network and saying, hey, would you like to come onto my show? If you make the content in the right way, if you make them look and feel like a rock star, if you make them shorts and clips and reels, and you make it super simple, that's one of the key things, and we'll talk about this in a future episode, then they will share that content out. And then their audience becomes your audience. So you not only do you need to think about guesting in terms of where you can go and speak, it's really important to be mindful of who in your network would be great to bring their audience by you letting them guest on your podcast. And just finally, because we're not going to get onto the SEO and the engaging call to action part today at all. We'll do that in a subsequent episode. Sorry, I've completely oversold it and didn't realize how much we'd talk. Guesting on podcasts is such an effective way to grow your podcast. It really is. Because if you think about it, that podcast has already got an audience. That audience are already podcast consumers. Because what you're doing oftentimes with like the social media, the mass market, the TikTok, is you're trying to take people who are on a platform like TikTok. They have intentionally created short form attention spans. There's nothing to say that because somebody's seen your post, because maybe lots of people, we've had a few posts that have gone absolutely mega viral for very, very, very niche podcasts, but then you look at the numbers and they do not convert. That 500,000 people who've watched it on TikTok because it blew up because of something on an algorithm does not convert even 1% of people to come and watch or consume the long form content. Whereas podcasts who have maybe got a much smaller audience than the generalized TikTok ecosystem or Insta or YouTube or whatever, they've already got an audience who like consuming the content in the way that you want them to consume your content. So it makes complete sense. You can even do things like pod swaps, and we'll talk about that further down the line as well. But there's just loads of great opportunities for you to utilize guests on your show to grow your podcast network and audience, and also for you to go onto other people's and to leverage that. I call it kidnapping audiences, and some people don't like that. Like, well, it feels a bit like tactical. It is tactical.
It is tactical. That's
100%
the point.
It is tactical. It's tactical who you invite on your podcast.
Yeah.
It's also tactical whose podcast that you go on to. Now, if you're thinking, you know, well, whose show could I go on to? There's a couple of really good sites. You've got Podbooker. .com. You've got matchmaker.fm.
That's free.
That's free as well. I think you can have like a paid for version so you can apply to be on more shows. And then there is about 1 million podcast booking agencies. The quality of those is
somewhat doubtful.
It is very doubtful. I've in all honesty, and I'm not slagging off that entire sector, I've never seen it done well. I've never seen it done well.
Dude, I you know, again, we've had this conversation before. Get pitched every single day, multiple times on all the different emails that we've got on, that are out there in the world where people can find me. And
hi, insert name. I really like your podcast.
Insert episode.
I particularly like episode. Insert episode. It's so contrived.
It is.
It's so contrived.
And the thing where they missed the trick, we're not going to disappear down a rabbit hole. Pull us back from the rabbit hole before we go down it. But they all talk about, for me anyway, they see it as an opportunity to pitch the business. And I'm like, I'm not interested in the business. I'm interested in the person behind the business. Yeah. If it's the story, like for my podcast, are entrepreneurs, business owners to a vast degree. It's like, I'm not interested in that. I want to know the person who created the business and the peaks and the troughs and the challenges and the failures and all the rest of it, and then the ultimate success. That's what I really learned to know about. But nobody seems to be listening.
No, but because it is just a generic pitch, isn't it? I'll tell you what we'll do. We are going to do a subsequent episode on how to pitch to be a guest.
Fantastic.
I'm going to write that down now because otherwise I'm going to forget how to.
Because you should all be doing that as part of your strategy. And as we are evidencing, there are podcasts being launched every single hour of every day of every single week. 99% of them don't actually stick around, but therein lies the opportunity for you to pitch your services to new podcasts who are all, as you will find out as podcasters, all looking for new guests all of the time to come on their show. So therein lies an opportunity for every single one of you. No idea why I'm doing that with the hands.
I liked it though. I liked it. It was like a weird dance.
Peter Crouch, robot.
It was a little bit Peter Crouch. Yeah. They've got a good podcast, haven't they? They're doing very interesting stuff in their podcast network space. Anyway, we'll talk about that over lunch. So hopefully you have found this episode useful. How to grow your podcast audience. There, of course, everyone's going to be looking and utilising social media, as you should be. 100% you should be. But also look within your network. Who in your network has potentially got, or your networks, plural, who has got an audience that have already got a vested interest in the content that you want to make. And finally, can you utilise guests on your show, and can you go and be a guest on other people's show to drive an audience back to your podcast? We will be back very, very soon. We'll be back very, very soon. Why have you gone Scottish? Very soon. We'll be back very soon for another episode where we've got, every time we do an episode, we've basically come up with another 3 episodes that we've got to go and create. It's pretty
quite a good creative tact.
It is. I like it. And by the way, if you want to go into this in more detail, of course, click the link in the show notes. Come and join us on Pod School. It is our completely free community to join, and you can find more information, more detailed coverings of all these sorts of topics to help you start, grow and monetize your podcast.